There are no two more powerful things in the world than weapons and words. And which one do you think leads to the other one being used?
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. I'm your host, Nate Desmond, and today I'm sitting down with Tommy Walker. Tommy Walker was the first marketing hire at Shopify Plus, and he is a brilliant content marketing strategist whose writing I've personally been learning from for over 10 years. So, Tommy, it is a joy to have you on the show.
Can I just say, when we first started DMing back and forth on LinkedIn, you made me feel old AF. That was one thing. You were like, I've been listening to you. I'm like, I'm about to turn 40. Like, there's a whole sort of thing here. But yeah, I've been doing this for a while.
Very young Tommy Walker. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, my first question for you is, you have a background in acting. I don't know if a lot of people know that. How has I'm probably going to mispronounce this, the Stanislavski method of understanding character motivation translate to
Yeah.
audience personas and content strategy?
It's everything. So it's Stanislavski. And for anybody who doesn't know, Konstantin Stanislavski is the reason why modern acting is the way it is. So he did acting instruction at the Russian Playhouse. He brought his teachings over to the US, and he had 8 primary students that were sort of the revolutionaries behind that. One of them was Lee Strasberg, who was primarily known as the guy who created method acting. It's based off of Stanislavski's method. And one of them was Sanford Meisner, who I have a direct lineage back to. So my teacher, when I went to conservatory, learned from him, who learned from Stanislavski. So Stanislavski is like my great grandfather when it comes to
Wow.
the education. And the primary thing there, there's lots that go into the method, right? If you're going to come up with your own philosophy on how, a discipline works, then there's going to be a lot more to this. But one of the main things that I think is really important is this concept of wants and needs. And what Stanislavski says about wants are, those are the conscious desires that drive the plot that somebody wants to pursue, right? And we have no shortage of information when it comes to what people want. That's keyword data, that's Reddit research. There's a number of things that we can go to find out, hey, what do people want? But the other side of Stanislavski's method is needs. And needs are unconscious desires. They are universal to the audience. And these are the little bits that people don't even necessarily know to communicate, right? So one of the methods, or one of the things that I use as one of my examples is, let's say we take a topic that's familiar to many people who are in the MarTech space or sales space, or a lot of content marketers. It's almost like a rite of passage to create this piece of content, how to build a landing page. Right. This is like, I've written and edited this article probably 8 times at this point. How to build a landing page. What do we want? Well, we want to know, have a compelling headline, solid body copy, a hero image, call to action button, stuff like that. Right. But what people need to know, and this is the unconscious thing, right? And we speak to something that's a little bit more core, a little bit more human, is that nobody's going to agree on what any of these elements are going to be. So that's what they need to know. But then the other part is, what they need is validation from their boss, or they need to have this sense of accomplishment that they don't currently have, right? So these elements that when you start to think about the words behind the words, which is what Stanislavski's method is all about, that's where you start to create more rich and layered practice, right? Or rich and layered performance when it comes to acting. And it's something that I think translates directly to the work that we do. And that's really just one small itty bitty piece of it. But I think that's one of the main things why I started leaning on that a little bit more in my work. And I think that that's how I've been able to have the career that I've had, because I've never seen anybody else approach it that way or talk about it that way.
Okay, I want to unpack this a bit more. If I'm understanding it correctly, this would be something like the IBM, no one got fired for buying IBM, which means you might not be buying it because it's the best computer or something, but you're buying it because you're a professional, you want to not get fired, and your manager is going to be happy with you purchasing IBM. Is that the
Right, that's the want.
Stanislavski message or method?
That would be the want.
Okay.
That would be the want, right? So I want to buy an IBM because nobody gets fired for buying an IBM. That's the safe bet. I want to take the safe route. It's the conservative route. It's the proven route. The
Yeah.
need behind that, though, is the desire to see that you are going to be conservative and be safe and you are making safe investments, right?
It's like my self
It's,
image showing up in what I
it's,
choose to purchase.
Right. It's how you want to be perceived by other people. So you don't want to be seen as the person who wants to rock the boat. You don't want to be somebody who is seen as taking risks or making crazy decisions. And I think if you were to look at something like Mac, right, take sort of a different approach there. People who buy Macs, they want to have a technology that is, or not Macs, just Apple products in general. They want to have a technology that sort of fits in with the rest of people, and it seems like it's got really good features, but the need is more about the affirmation. It's more of a desire, right? We need to feel cool. We need to feel like we belong and that we're part of this in crowd of people who are in the know, right? So it's really, the need is about that unconscious desire that we all have that's a lot more human, right? It's a lot more universal. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I think that makes sense. So then, if I'm thinking about it correctly now, I'm thinking like you buy a sports car, the need, or sorry, the want is you want to go fast, but the need is you want to look a certain sort of way. So you choose a certain color and a certain design that reflects the aesthetic that you want people to see about you.
Yeah.
How does
Yeah. And
that
I,
flow
I might
into
even argue that that's the want, right? The want
fair?
is to be able to see that. But the need there is, maybe it comes from a place of insecurity, right? Or maybe it comes as a way to, like, the want to project a certain image. Well, why does that happen, right? Like, because there are plenty of people who make millions of dollars. John Lasseter of Pixar was infamous, right, or famous for knowing to drive the same crappy car that he had for years before he ever got a car that more reflected his status, right? So the want, I think, in a sports car case is more of like a status symbol, and then the need comes from, maybe it's a place of insecurity, or maybe it's a place of, I mean, I would say maybe a place of insecurity. It's probably the best route, right? And if you came from nothing, right? If you have this background where you came from, very little means, right? There's something in you that needs to prove to yourself and prove to other people that, you've made it, right? So
That makes
that's
sense.
kind of that whole thing.
So then how would that show up in like a landing page? Let's say it's a landing page for a sports car. How would you reflect the want and the need?
The hard part with that is the need part is really that because it's an unconscious desire, it works its way into your word choice, right? It works its way into everything else that goes on there. So you might reflect the want very specifically, but if you know as a copywriter that underlying need, the emotional side of things, it does change the energy of everything that's going into the copy, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's a tough question to answer because it is one that you just have to keep that in mind
Yeah.
of where that person is coming from emotionally, because it ultimately affects the energy of the piece itself, which you could go into all sorts of stuff as it relates to that. But I think the reason why a lot of B2B content marketing specifically can feel lifeless is because it's not addressing that underlying thing. And it influences everything from cadence to word choice to sentence structure. Like, do you see what I'm getting at here?
Yes. It's not
Yeah.
explicit that you're putting into specific words to reflect this, but it's more the subconscious behind. And it's interesting how it sounds like you almost just need to know it. Like there's not an action you need to take on the basis of it, but if you know it, then the action will automatically happen as you write the copy.
Right. Exactly.
That's interesting. And okay, so there are a number of interesting examples from your career. I'm going to pick one, which is Intuit. You were their editor in
Sure.
chief for a few years. as
Yep.
much as you can talk about it, what would be the sort of personas you would be considering when you're writing narrative for Intuit?
That's a great question. So it was one of the first questions I had to answer. And I got to take sort of a step back there,
Yeah.
right? One of the things that when I was at Shopify, right, when we were looking at our customers and we were talking to everybody and really trying to figure it out, the question that I'm always trying to ask is what is that spark that everybody shares, right? Like
Mm.
there's a core spark that everybody shares. So what is it that drives our customers, right? And I can get into like, I can go into 4 different brand narrative. Like there's a lot of stuff I could go into with that. But the question that I'm trying to ask is what is that common spark behind everybody? And what we found at Shopify, with Shopify Plus specifically, is that these were people who were ultimately trying to make their dent in the universe, right? And when our leader, Lauren Paddleford, came at it, talked to everybody about it and who our market was and everything like that, like what we were trying to find is that, right? People are trying to make their dent in the universe. And what Lauren would say, sorry, I'm kind of rambling a little bit. What Lauren would say is, I don't want to go after the Fortune 500. I want to create the next Fortune 500.
Yeah.
And the people that we were talking to, right? We had Gymshark, we had Allbirds, we had a number of companies that eventually went public. And a lot of them in the early days would attribute that success to Shopify Plus, part of that success, anyways, to Shopify Plus, because the meta narrative that we were trying to create in our content program. Now, the sales team did a lot of the work, so I can't take all of the credit there. But what we were trying to do in the meta narrative was ask, what can you do when technology gets out of the way? Right? That was one of the big things. So the question that I had to answer when I went to QuickBooks was these were not people who were trying to make their dent in the universe, right? It's almost the
Yeah.
exact opposite
You try not to
because
be dented by the
QuickBooks,
universe. At
right?
least
Well,
that's how I do
QuickBooks
my taxes.
customers, yeah, exactly. And QuickBooks, they said, I don't remember the exact logo at the time, but it was championing those who champion themselves or something along those lines. And the idea was that their customers, our customers, were not trying to put their dent in the universe. They were more satisfied with running their mechanic shop, right? These are your mechanics. These are your local bakeries. These are anybody who's on Main Street USA who's not trying, like, who would rather take their own risk to make their living, but make a comfortable living, right? Doing the thing that they love to do, right? And one of the biggest fears that they might have is having to take a 9 to 5,
Fair.
right? Having
Yeah.
to shut their business down and not do something that they love to do for a living, right? Or at least
Yes.
rely on the thing that they like to do. If your local mechanic says, I can't do mechanics, I can't run my own shop, then there's like a piece of them that sort of dies a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So, and these are people who just want to be doing things on their own terms, not so they can make some massive disruption, but so they can make a living, right?
Yeah.
So, that was one of the things that we were looking at, and that was one of the needs that I started to boil down there was this idea of independence. They need independence. They need to feel like they are in control come hell or high water, right? Like there's a lot of risk involved, and a lot of people will take that chance knowing the risks and continue moving forward and pushing forward even though the odds are stacked against them, so they can do the thing that they love and be in control of what it is that they want to do and not
Yeah.
have to be beholden to somebody else.
So would you recommend then avoiding, say, a multi-persona strategy of like there are these 5 different customer groups and we're trying to reach each of them and instead find that unifying insight that cuts across everyone?
That's generally the way that, because like both Shopify and QuickBooks were both not vertical specific products, right? They were very lateral products. So what I try to think about when it comes to that is what is that common spark behind everybody, right? And then what ponds do I fish in to find those individual personas that we're trying to look at, right? So
Interesting.
with the content studio, right, with my consulting
Yeah.
practice, I work with 3 very different ponds. I work with, high growth B2B SaaS startups. I work with enterprises, and I work with freelancers, right? When it comes to my product specifically, those are the groups that I'm sort of going after. But when I talk to these people, the common message, right,
Yeah.
is using your creativity to create signature work that people want to be drawn to, right? So how that message operates, the small tweaks that need to be made, like the core message is the same, but the
Yeah.
tweaks are minor when it comes to how we're speaking to the problems that they might have. But problems and the way that they solve those problems, the problems might be different, but the way that they solve those problems might be pretty much the same. Does that make
How
sense?
would I think so. How would that show up in, let's take your agency. How would that show up in your content strategy? Would you be making slightly different content tracks for each of these three
Yeah.
pools? Or is it just you're targeting, you have the same content, but then you reach them in different places?
Yeah. So the content studio is a really interesting example because I am sort of reworking some of the stuff to deal with more of my information products than I am with the consulting practice. With the content studio, I'm focusing on, or with my products like the narrative design toolbox and content theory, I'm looking at agencies, freelancers who are trying to agencies, right, who target B2B SaaS startups in a lot of cases, or the high growth startups. So the people that I consult with, freelancers who are trying to go from individual contributor to strategist, right? And then that other side where it's mid-market B2B startups who are looking to define their category, right? That common thread between all of them is creating signature work that people want to be attracted to, right? The challenges that they might have though is, agencies have very specific challenges when it comes to client retention, and they might have very similar challenges as it relates to client acquisition, right? And how do we have unique voice across clients, especially if they're a service provider where they are, creating content.
Yes.
Freelancers have a very similar challenge, right? So that makes it pretty easily. Freelancers have a very similar challenge for very similar reasons, but when it comes to content theory specifically, right? And I'm working on this with the narrative design toolbox because it's still in production.
Yeah.
With content theory, I've already kind of gone through this. With content theory, one of the biggest challenges is actually, let me take a step back here for a second. One of the biggest challenges for all three of these groups is being able to pitch a strategic conversation. So content theory it's based on, the grounding of it is an 8-layer market research process that I have, which uses a bunch of different people's frameworks and sort of stacks them together to ultimately find what are different brand narratives. What are different brand narratives that people have or different companies would have?
Yeah.
How do we dissect our competitors to find those
Interesting.
gaps? And then
Yeah.
who are we going to align with to get that message out there? That's a common challenge across three different groups, right? Writers
Yeah.
who want to turn strategist, they have to show that they have a strategy that will get people trusting their strategy chops. And if they're going like, hey, I can write for you all day long, but here's how I approach strategy. Well, now you've got a really similar thing. Clients or agencies, they have a very similar challenge, right? Where how are they going to acquire new customers if they don't have a process in place, that says here's how we approach this work. And
Yeah.
then with our in-house people, right? And this is, mid-market B2B SaaS, there's a trickle effect where it does affect, the larger companies as well. The question then becomes, okay, well, how do you communicate and get buy-in, right, from your boss for these big swing ideas that you normally can't get out the door,
Yeah.
right? So the challenge is almost exactly the same. The way you communicate that challenge is a little bit differently, where it's like, let me get buy-in
Yeah.
overall is the challenge. And then let me have a language and a way to de-risk this big swing idea. Like the tweaks are really minor when I start thinking about that core, create signature work and then
Yeah.
get buy-in to get that signature work out the door. Does that
It's
make sense?
interesting. That does.
We on
And
the same
another
page?
piece of that I think is really fascinating is the choice to focus. Because let's take again you as an example here. You have so much expertise in so many different parts of content, content theory, content writing, etc. but you've chosen to focus in a couple of areas. One of them right now, the narrative design section.
Hmm.
To someone who feels like there's so much in my product that I'm not talking about by focusing on something, what is the
Mm.
value of ignoring all the other parts of your product or your skill set to focus on just one area?
So I'm going to take a step back for a second here because you had asked something about the content studio, and I want to share what that is for us, right? So there's another concept that Stanislavski has, which is the super objective and the central conflict, right? So for the content studio, what I've identified with our ideal customers, and this is sort of across the board, right, is the super objective for a person who is our ideal customer is to be seen as a strategic leader. And the central conflict that they would have is my boss doesn't get content, right? And what I'm working on right now is I'm in the process right now of really trying to refine how do I approach that from the content perspective.
Yeah.
We can start to break our content strategy or our calendar down into the 4 act structure because acts match perfectly to quarters, right? How do we break that down even further into each month? And how do we break that down even further into each individual piece of content that we put together, right? So there's, and then there's always going to be act objectives and act conflicts, right? Because if we say the big goal is to be seen as a strategic leader, okay, well, that's going to break down into 4 different goals, right? We have to achieve this, and this if we're going to be seen as a strategic leader, but we're going to have challenges with this, and this, right? If we're going to try to
Yeah.
do that particular thing. And then if we break it down even further, okay, so what are the 3 different things that we need to have to accomplish that bigger thing? So it's very much like I heard this from a guy on YouTube that I really like called Local. I love this. He says it's very much like Fibonacci sequence when it comes to the different principles, and it starts big and then starts spiraling down because when you get into um an episode level of a TV show, there's a central conflict of the overall episode. They're trying to work towards a much bigger conflicts to solve, and then there are conflicts on a scene level, right? So you've got your you've got your season conflict, you've got your act conflicts, then you have your episode conflicts, and then you have your scene conflicts. So it all breaks down. What was the
Yeah.
original question? Because that's how it works with the content studio and the products that I'm trying to sell. But yeah, what was the original question?
I don't even remember, but I think you gave a great answer to whatever it was. I want to dive into something you mentioned, content calendars. So we're talking a little bit
Yes.
about the Fibonacci sequence, which is that spiral that you see everywhere once you start looking for it. Content calendars. You had a great LinkedIn post recently that said most people's content calendars are like they took their favorite book, ripped pages out, and started randomly sticking them on calendar dates.
Hmm.
Given very often, not everyone will see all of your content. So I might see like
Hmm.
one piece this month, one piece in 6 months. What is the value of having a content strategy, even though people maybe just see bits and pieces and relatively fewer people will see everything in the full beauty of it?
Yeah, yeah. So this plays into this. This is where the objectives and the conflicts all play into each other, right? So if we're looking at a month's worth of content, right, we might
Yeah.
have the same objective and the same conflict that happens within that month, right? So all of the pieces that we start to produce are trying to solve that particular conflict and that particular objective, right? Or yeah, trying to work towards that particular objective in that particular conflict. And what that
Yeah.
means, what that allows us to do is, okay, let's take that and break it down into individual topics, right? And then within each one of those topics, can we reference back to the overall conflict, and can we reference forward or to the conflict and to the objective to then create a solid narrative within the piece, right? That will have setups and payoffs. And then, there's a bunch of different things that can go into this, right? But then we're also able to properly use our internal links to get somebody to go backwards
Oh,
and
that's smart.
use our subscriptions, right, to get people to stay tuned moving forwards. Now, what I've
Yeah.
seen happen with that when I've taken that approach, right, and I haven't always taken that approach, let's be real, like there's the
It's a lot
objective
of work.
reality of this world. Yeah, I mean, it's a ton of work. But when I've done that, I've seen anywhere between 50 to 60% return rates on my traffic, right?
Fair.
Which is important. And you see higher subscription rates when you start doing that as well. And you need to have people diving deeper into the content because how are you ever going to get into the consideration set if you don't, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen that. And one of the examples that I use, and see if I can find it somewhere. I think I can. I think I have it ready. Yeah.
Ooh, I love it.
So let's say I did this ChatGPT prompt and I loved it. So it's, let's say Frodo from Lord of the Rings was preparing for his entire journey to destroy the One Ring by reading blog posts. What are the titles of the blog posts he might read that correspond with the main narrative points of the Fellowship of the Ring, right? So we have choosing the right gear for long journeys, essential tips for hobbits. The next one would be secrets of the old forest, navigating mythical landscapes close to home. The art of evading black riders, tips and stealth and safety along the road, right? Hospitality in a strange land, a traveler's way to experience Bree, right? So in each one of those pieces, right, somebody
Yeah.
might have an entry point from, hospitality in strange lands. But in each one of those pieces, you can start to reference back to what should have happened before, right? And then you're
Yeah.
using your internal links a lot more strategically. Now, that might look like, oh, this is, that's great, Tommy. Like, but how does that translate to ROI, right? That might be the next question that comes up with that. And that's one that I get. And it's okay. So what I've seen happen when you start doing this, because you're exposing people to more of the problem more regularly, because they are taking that choice to look for or go backwards and to
Yeah.
move forward, right? When you do that, I've seen that have the time to sail, right?
Fair.
I did this. We did this as an experiment. We have the time to sail, and we were able to double our overall conversion rates because people were more exposed to the problem. They were more tuned in, right? So, we reduced the time to sale and we doubled everything that we were doing because, yeah, I'm just going to repeat myself there. We exposed people to the problem a lot more in a shorter period of time because they were opening, 3 or 4 tabs because the content became a lot more bingeable because we knew where it was going. And if you think about a TV show,
Yeah.
right? TV shows, that's how every Netflix series is able to keep you hooked, right? That's the reason why you'll go, honey, like, you want to do just one more episode? I know we got to go to bed. I know I got work in the morning.
Sure.
But but we have to see how this particular thing resolves,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I use Breaking Bad as my example all the time. And if you know what you're looking for, each Breaking Bad season is, most of them are broken up into, uh, was it 14 episodes? Right. Yeah. And then what you have is 3 episodes focused on Act 1, 3 episodes focused on Act 2, over 6. Episode number 7 is your midpoint, right? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Most of them are 12 episodes, right?
It's
So you
incredible.
see how they're trying to right, right. Yeah, you see it all in acts, and that's when when you go just one more episode, it's because generally speaking, you're trying to see how they're resolving an act overall, or what's the new challenge that happens in a new act. So anyways, and you can do, I mean, there's a lot more that you can go into this. You've got your A plot, you've got your B plot. So say you're publishing twice a week, you're doing that same thing on one track, right? Every Monday, you're trying to solve one problem, but some of those problems spin out into another problem, which then becomes your Wednesday, B plot, right? Where those two things run in parallel. There's synergies between the two of them and they might intersect at points, but then you're working towards an overall resolution of the act, which might be something like launching an ebook or launching a product or launching a webinar, right? So all of this stuff starts to play together in a way where you're like, I need more because
Yeah.
there's stuff that's always a little bit unresolved. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does.
Okay.
Okay, so there are a few different directions I want to take this. The first one is stories. So when you're looking at acts and episode acts and scenes and all these different layers, this makes sense for a TV show that is a story. It's a bit harder to put into context for LinkedIn posts about marketing or something like that. Do you recommend that people bring in stories to illustrate their points? So if you're selling Intuit, for example, do you bring in stories
Mhm.
of here's this person in North Dakota that used Intuit in his mechanic shop or something? Or do you do this in a nonfiction setting also?
You can do both. You can do both. So, I'm always going to reference back to Shopify. I didn't like Shopify is where I did my best work in a lot of this stuff. I had a lot more agency when it came to how that all worked. So I need to kind of put that caveat on there, right? On Mondays, we did, one track. On Wednesdays, we do another track. And then on Fridays, we'd release case studies, right? And what those case studies would do is I very intentionally said in the very beginning, most case studies do company X works with company Y and sees Z results. What we were trying to do with those case studies, I said, we're going to approach these like Rolling Stone interviews. I want to know what the problem was, like what led to the problem, because that's a lot more interesting. These were generally a little bit more standalone, right? It was still tying into the overall theme of what we were going after, but they were a lot more standalone. And what we were able to do is find out like some really crazy details. The person that I had writing these was an investigative journalist before he ever got into marketing. So he was able to ask some really serious probing questions that would, and sometimes get people to be really emotional on those calls. And what we found, right? I'll give you one of my favorite stories because we were trying to take that storytelling approach. There was one gentleman who, if we were to do the company X versus company Y and Z results sort of narrative, it was our server room got caught on fire. So we switched over to Shopify, and who had cloud e-commerce, which wasn't being taken seriously at the time at all in the enterprise and mid-market space. And since we've done that, company X, company Y, Z results, since we've done that, we've been able to make sure that our uptime has been whatever, and we don't have any server issues and da 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 da. But the way that we approach this conversation is what led up to the server room being on fire. The guy, it was 2:00 in the morning during his bachelor party when he got the conversation from his CTO on that was going down. Now, I don't know. Have you been married before? Are you married?
I am married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the bachelor party, 2:00 in the morning on the night of your bachelor party, you're in a very, very different state of mind to deal with
Yes.
challenges like this, right? So we're able to create conflict in that way. So the conflict then becomes implied, where it's not just the server room being on fire, but also what's your state of mind? What does the bachelor party festivities lead up to on how you try and solve this problem, right? So that brings a lot more of a human element in it. And what we found with all of the case studies that we were doing, going back to that common spark idea that I was talking about before, is all of our customers were willing to overcome incredibly personal challenges in some cases and incredibly high obstacles with massive barriers to entry to solve the challenges that they were trying to solve. There was another gentleman who was part of the LGBTQ community where he started his store as a big FU to the people who bullied him growing up, right? And it took a
Yeah.
lot of personal ownership to own that thing inside himself to then go, you know what, like I'm going to service, like I'm going to be a part of this community by selling products that are, something that is more LGBTQ specific, right? So these were, when I look at conflict, I use something from Robert McKee called the 3 levels of conflict, which is extrapersonal conflict, things that are happening out of the world, out in the world, systems, weather, economy, right? Forces of nature, if you will. Personal conflict, which are challenges with individual people, so bosses, lovers, family, friends, etc. And then inner conflict, which are conflicts with your mind, body, or soul, right? Or mind, body, and emotions. And then so when I looked at these challenges, when I start looking at obstacles overall, that's sort of what I'm trying to find as the overall conflict. And when we can look at the conflict inside these individual pieces, they're not surface level conflicts, right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's a lot of
It's
talking.
fascinating when you think about it. It's kind of obvious in retrospect that, yes, we should take this incredibly seriously and treat it the same way we would entertainment. But very few, especially B2B companies, do that. Most of the time, it's much more boring and missing the mark of truly being engaging and being something you want to follow. So it's fascinating that dichotomy. I wanted to go back before we go deeper in that. Okay, go ahead.
Reason for that too, like the reason why I try to bring these principles and have always tried to bring these principles into the work, when I've been allowed and when I've been able to, I'm only able to articulate it more clearly now that I've been trying to like crack my own, brain open to put this stuff down on paper. So like, it hasn't always been the best, right? I haven't always been the best at articulating this until now. But the reason why that is so effective and why I think it's so important is we're competing for attention on the same exact
Yes.
screens. And if you this is a lot of this is screenwriting 101, right? Screenwriting 101, 201, 301, right? And filmmakers and anybody who's taken a screenwriting course, because this is so basic, like this is stuff, these are principles that we see every single day in the things that entertain us.
Yeah.
But in my mind, like and because we're competing for attention in the same spaces, if we're not creating with this level of intentionality, right? In something that is objectively more important than a person's entertainment because we're spending time, like this is somebody's livelihood that we're trying to influence in some way, shape, or form. It makes very little sense to me why we wouldn't think about the person's super objective, right? Like everybody has, and this is whether you want to admit it or not, the beginning of the year is a perfect time to start implementing that. You can implement it anytime you want. But the beginning of the year is a perfect time to implement this because at the beginning of the year, everybody is stating to themselves what their super objective is, right? Like most people, a lot of people don't want to admit, I don't have a New Year's resolution. But
Yeah.
everybody has a New Year's resolution. This year is going to be my year. This year is going to be different. This year, I'm going to lose 50 pounds. This year, I'm going to be seen. I'm going to get the promotion this year. This year, I'm going to make $1 million, right? So we have to have this level of if characters in movies and TV and literature and like all of the things that keep us entertained are going to have this. Why not bring those principles? Because we're competing on the same screens. Like
Yeah.
that's so important. So yeah. Anyways, that's the ultimate why for me when it comes to like championing these concepts and bringing it out. Because if it's not engaging, right? And Seinfeld has this thing. It's not an attention span problem. It's an execution problem, right? If it's not engaging in the same way or a similar way where we're talking about real life stakes and getting people involved, wanting to open 15 tabs, watching another video and another video and another video, then point of this work, like how are we ever going to influence change? How are we ever going to take, plot points in their lives to say like, okay, we're going to continue to move them through the plot to bring a personal transformation to them that's going to help them get to the place that they want to go.
Yeah.
Right. So the individual contributor who wants to be seen as a strategic leader, but their boss doesn't get content, right? What are the steps that we need to take to help them get their boss to get content, not just from a tactical level, but from a personal development level as well? You see what I'm saying? Like there's one side of that where it's like, okay, well, you need to be prepared and to have these conversations and get all of these people on board and have that. But then there's the other part of like, but are you insecure about your own leadership capabilities?
Yes. Which
You have
going
to
back to our
overcome
point from the very
wants
beginning,
and needs.
it shows up. If you're really doing it from an insecurity, that will show up in how I'm telling my boss about it, and that impacts the result.
Right. Right. Yeah. You can give the presentation, like go to the 8-layer market research process. You can give the presentation of that all day long. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to show up here. Right. But if you don't have the confidence to do that, I can give you all the tactics all day long. But if you don't have the confidence to like have that conversation or how to deal with the hard conversation or how to deal with the challenge or the pushback, and I'm not putting that into the communications of bringing this stuff to light, then it's not going to work. Right. And that's the wants and needs sort of in action and how I'm looking at that with my product specifically.
Okay, I want to get super tactical. And so I think there's still an element of I get how this works for a TV show. I get that we are competing in the same space, and so we need to be as clear as TV shows in capturing people's attention. But how do you actually do it? So what would be like maybe an example month of what you did with Shopify Plus? How do you capture
Mhm.
people into the storyline? Or pick an example if there's a better one. How do you capture people
Yeah.
into the storyline and the narrative? What does an arc look like in that context? That sort of thing.
So a lot of it starts with talking to people for real. Like a lot of companies
So many
are
good things
allergic
start
to,
there.
yeah. A lot of companies are really allergic to talking to customers. And I could go off on an entire tangent of what it is that we're trying to get out of our customer conversations because I look at Jungian archetypes and functional cast design. Like there's a number of things that I look at when it comes to talking to people, right?
Wow.
Like it goes deep. And I'll show you an example of
Yeah.
this after we're done here because I have the slide open right now that does this. But how do we look at arcs, right? And this is more of the content calendar. Here's how we approach this from a very tactical level. So, actually, how much of this is podcast versus video?
We can switch to video. You want to share screen?
If you're listening, yes. If you're listening to the podcast right now, be sure to go watch the video version of this so you can see exactly what it is that I'm talking about and how this works out in action. Now, this was sort of just something that I did um, on a whim, right? So, right now, there's the typical content calendar approach, right? Where it's, social media
Yeah.
automation 101, how to save, 5 hours every day a week, when to post on YouTube, right? 13 best social media management tools. This is going to be what you see all the time. Now,
Yeah.
when I zoom out,
This is
right,
great.
I've identified the super objectives. I want to be seen as a strategic leader. Central conflict, my boss doesn't get content. Quarter one, right? How do we look at this? How do we break that down into 4 individual phases? So quarter 1 is act 1, laying the groundwork. Act 2 is experimentation and insight. Act 3, quarter 3 is to optimize and consolidate. And act 4 is expansion and scale. So with act 1, laying the groundwork, we've got the act objective of develop systems to rescue content from irrelevance, right? And then the
Yes.
act conflict is to the content landscape has changed, but they're operating on old foundations. Now, those conflicts are that objective in that conflict is going to govern a lot of what happens in the next 3 months of content, right?
Yes.
Act 2, experimentation and insight. The act objective is test new distribution systems to uncover what works and what doesn't. And the act conflict is the tools and channels keep changing, so do the rules for visibility. If I were to break that down even further, then I would say, from the extra personal conflict, the algorithm is always changing, right? So everything, a lot of what we, not everything, but a lot of what we talk about in the 3 months in that quarter would have the conflict of the algorithm changing and how do we take different approaches to overcome the algorithm, right? Do we work with it? Do we work against it? Do we do things that are algorithm proof, right? How do we start to look at that? Now, breaking this down a little bit further,
Wow.
right? And this is where you have to start looking at this. If you're listening to the podcast, you're going to have to look at this. So watch the video. I'm sure the link will be in the show notes.
Oh, yeah.
So when we start looking at each quarter, not only do we have the act objective and the act conflict, but we're also looking at what the act focus and the narrative purpose of it is. So I'm only going to go into act 1, which is laying the groundwork. The focus is to show readers how to build a repeatable content distribution system before they start worrying about tactics. And the narrative purpose is to introduce the reader to the idea that posting alone isn't enough. They learn why distribution matters and map their time and resources. This act sets up the external challenge of time management and the internal doubt that isn't working, right? And then the third part of that is when I look at the overall act, right? This is just the high level view. The key scenes of that would be, and scenes would be individual pieces of content, right? Content
Yeah.
distribution decoded, no nonsense guide, why you need a clear distribution strategy, how to audit content for reuse, how to incorporate AI into your content distribution system. All of these, you can start to, if you look at the through line with these topics, all of these topics are related to each other. It makes sense to read them back to back, right? And then the other part of this, right? It's really easy for everybody to go like, oh, well, I'm just talking about content as blog posts. No, if you have this in mind, I can have a podcast on why you need a clear distribution strategy. I can have at the very end, I might have this all compiled as an ebook. I might have a
Yeah.
video on how to incorporate AI into your content distribution system. And as a strategist, depending on what resources I have available to me, I would balance this out to say, this is what we have for this, and this is how I can get people brought into the overall ecosystem of content that I'm trying to create, right?
This is
So
awesome.
we break this down even further.
This is great.
right? So act one, laying the groundwork. The objective is, again, to develop systems to rescue content from irrelevance. Act conflict is to develop a content landscape, or the content landscape has changed, but they're operating in old foundations. If we're going to try to solve this problem, we're going to break it down each month into three different, smaller objectives, right? So January is the wake up call. The objective is to confront the cost of content waste and accept that distribution needs to change. The conflict is the market now demands distribution, but their job is only rewards content creation. In here, and what I say here is this month is about confronting the truth, right? And this is something we haven't talked about, but I've got another concept called the ghost, the truth, and the lie, which comes from Stanislavski, right? Where the truth is the thing that you need to accept to have your character growth. The lie or the ghost is something that is a traumatic event that happened in a character's backstory that leads them to believe a lie about the world, right? We all hold false beliefs about the world to help us stay sane when it comes to dealing with the overall challenges of the world. And in a story, a lot of what the story is about them overcoming the lie and accepting the truth.
I love
So we're
that.
trying to do the same thing with our content.
Yeah.
And then in here, I look at the key story beats. So going back to the wake up call, we've got the objective of confront the cost of content waste, conflict. The market now demands distribution, but the job rewards creation. The key story beats, which are not necessarily individual posts or pieces of content. I want to show them how much content they've already created and how little impact it's had. We're confronting the truth. We're looking at the truth and going like, you're wasting a lot of time. Reveal the irreversible cost of relying solely on creation. Normalize the burnout and frustration. So, hey, you're not alone in
Yes.
being frustrated and burnout. This is something that happens. Introduce the concept of content leverage, doing more with what already exists. Provide emotional relief. You don't have to create more. You need to activate what you already have. These are not necessarily, again, I want to reiterate, these are not necessarily blog posts or videos or podcasts, but these are points that I want to make in each one of these things, right? And
Yeah.
if I know that, then I can lead up to that point. I can set it up and pay it off, right? These are more storytelling principles. Set it up and pay it off in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And then we've got the post types here, which is like maybe we have something on how to identify high leverage content buried in your archives, why so much content fails, and how to make it work harder without rewriting a word. You don't need a new strategy. You need a distribution mindset, right? So all of these things start to work together. And then once we have that set up, the next month is the system setup, and it has its own objective and its own conflict and its own key story beats. And we start building off of that month after month. And the idea is if somebody were to read your content calendar
Yeah.
front to back, what is it that they're trying to solve, right? Like, are they going to achieve their super objective and overcome the central conflict? And yeah, and this is the stuff that gets people coming back.
Yes, because you want to see what's next. You want to go back to what was there before. This is powerful. I love seeing it in practice. It puts things very concretely. It
Mhm.
reminds me of a follow-on question that I had, which is when you think about how you're building this out,
Mhm.
it can be very tempting to use AI instead of talking to customers. So to go to AI
Mhm.
and say like, hey, this is my company. Tell me what is your want, what's your need, et cetera, et cetera. I'm
Mhm.
guessing you have a strong opinion on this. Do you think it's okay to do that? Or is it very,
Yeah,
very important to actually go to a real customer?
100%. Yeah,
Ooh,
it's one of the best
interesting.
ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I'll show you after the AI that I've built because it's built on narrative principles. It's trained on
So
like
cool.
25 different narrative principles that does this. But no, AI is great at this. So one of the other things that, I kind of mentioned before, I talked about using Jungian archetypes, which a lot of people will look at the archetypal figures and go like, oh, we want to be the sage or we want to be the jester, right? People forget that this is like these archetypal figures were not arbitrary. They were based off of a body of research, hundreds of thousands of interviews Carl Jung did to classify people into these different personality types, right? We're trying to do the same thing. And what AI is really good at because it knows everything. Like, let's be real, it has all of the world's information at its fingertips, and at your fingertips, you can type it in and get a really highly synthesized answer. If
Yeah.
you bring in like your transcripts, right, of your customer interviews, you know what questions to ask in these interviews. That's something I teach in content theory. You know the right questions to ask of these interviews to get those answers out of there. AI is great at synthesizing this information to give you what that 70-30 split, and that's a whole nother thing I talk about, of that inside there. And then from there, it's like, oh, well, what could we say is the super objective, right? We're trying to get that out of the conversation. We're obviously not going to say to a customer, like, hey, what's your super objective? Right. But we can say, like, what is the thing you want most in the world right now that seems like it's completely impossible to get? Right. Like, say your business is the most successful version of your business possible. What is it that you would ultimately want to achieve?
I love that. Yes.
Right. Now, what's the major thing that's getting in your way of doing that?
And
Now,
suddenly you've
some
got the
people aren't
super
going to.
objective and the conflict.
Right. And you might have to probe a little bit more. You might have to get to that a little bit more deeply. But AI is great at synthesizing all of this information. So, and you can do this in Notebook. You can do this with ChatGPT and the custom projects. I haven't used Claude a lot, but I'm fairly certain you could do the same thing there. And it becomes a little bit more conversational. But you can pull out so much of this information. And I do say this too, like, I don't recommend this at all, but you can still create really solid fiction on these principles without talking to customers. But talk to customers, because that's going to be the thing that makes it that much more real, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to talk to real people for it to be really real. You can create really good fiction without it, but it's kind of pointless because there are other things I talk about in content theory, which is like levels of motivation, right? What are people primarily motivated by? Do they want to be seen as a hero and have a perception or they want to build a perception of other people? Or are they motivated by an ideal and it's more internal, but still, deal that? Are they not motivated at all, but you're trying to get them? They have a reason to be motivated.
Yeah.
So if we understand these core motivations of a person, then we're able to incorporate that into what it is that we're trying to get out of those conversations. So
Yes.
there's a lot that goes into the way I try to approach the customer research that you can't get from AI. Like, I know people who are motivated by not getting fired, right? Versus, and then they do things in their job so they don't get fired. Whereas I know other people who are motivated by being seen as the ideal version of an employee, right? How you
Yeah.
position your content, everything that you write, everything that you produce, right? Every video, every podcast, every, blog post, how you position that is going to be very, very different. The same message, capital message, how you position that's going to be different based on what they're motivated by, right? And you can't get
Yeah.
that directly from AI, but AI is really good at synthesizing a lot of the information to pull it all together. So
Fair. So
when
go
we
to
look
the
at
real
that,
customers and then use
yeah, go
AI
to
to synthesize what they've said.
Yeah. Yeah. And if, like, realistically too, like, I've worked in large organizations and there's a lot of red tape to actually talk to people. Right. So part of the customer research process, the 8-layer market research process that I teach too, is can you extract that information from real world conversations that are happening, on Reddit, on X, on LinkedIn,
Smart.
right? Can you pull that information out? And to bring it back to the acting background, one of the things that I brought into my mentality when I first got into this field was, what is script analysis, or what is market research but script analysis,
Oh,
right?
interesting. Yeah.
How can I read between the lines of what people are saying to get what they're actually saying?
Well,
Because
that's
that's what you do in
fun.
script analysis, right? Like, you don't build a character. Like, oftentimes screenwriters, if you're following one of my mentors, Robert McKee, the dialogue is one of the last things that happens,
Oh,
right?
interesting. This I
What
did
will
not know.
happen? Yeah. Dialogue will be one of the last things that's written. And because every time we have a conversation, there's like another layer of what's happening underneath that conversation. The way that's
Yeah.
really, like one of the best ways, argument scenes are really good, but arguments in real life, like, you're trying to communicate something different, but you only have words to say one thing, and sometimes those words lead to a miscommunication in what it is that you're actually trying to say, because that's what happens in screenwriting and in acting, right? In screenwriting, what will happen a lot of times in the best scripts possible is that they'll map out what the words are actually trying to say,
Wow.
right? And it's like, you're not listening to me. I am trying to tell you I love you. No, I'm like, come on. But then there are the words that lay down on top of that, right? After they have that mapped out, then the words go on top of that. And then, as an actor, like as a screenwriter, you only have the dialogue. And as an actor, what your job is to look between the lines and try to pull that stuff out, because that's where the genuine performance comes from, not just what's on the page. And you can see it
That's really cool.
I'm sure you've seen a ton of movies or TV shows where it's just the dialogue that the actors are, doing. And you can
Yes.
feel it. You can feel the difference between the two. So,
Yes, yes. Not just reading the words, but expressing some depth behind it. That's incredible. Okay, I wanted to go back if you're open to sharing the Jungian archetypes. You mentioned that in passing. It's super fascinating. I've always found these like Jungian or other archetypes. Unfortunately, I tend to forget them very quickly, is what I found. They're interesting, but I haven't found a way to connect them to reality in a way that's helpful for me. I'm sure it's there. I'm curious from your perspective, how do you use this in talking to customers?
yeah. So there are three things that we try to ask, and these are three things that Carl Jung was trying to get at when he was doing this research too. Is what do they value? What do they fear? And what are their strategies for success? Right.
Yeah,
So for me, right, I look if I were to dissect myself as as a reader or as a customer or as a person, right? I look at a 70-30 split, right? 70% is the primary archetypal figure, 30% is the influence that makes it unique. So for me, I'm a creator sage. So what that means is that I value creativity, signature work, or creativity, transformation through words. I believe that words have the ability to change the world. One of the things I say is like as one of my little catchphrases is you know, there are no two more powerful things in the world than weapons and words. And which one do you think leads to the other one being used?
that is powerful.
Right. So we look at what do they value, right? So for me, it's creativity, it's uniqueness, it's believing in that power. And what do they fear, right? I fear mediocrity. I fear other people ripping my ideas off. I hate this idea. And then what is my strategy for success? Well, I personally believe that it's important for you to create signature work that's going to drive people to believe in, to action, right? Some people are calling that
Yeah.
content IP, right? There's a number of different words for that, but for me, it's about creating signature work. With the Sage side, it's like, well, I also believe in creativity should be quantifiable, right? And I should make decisions based on what I've seen work, and I want to pull out those insights from what I've learned from customer research, from looking at analytics, like all of that, to make my creativity a lot stronger and a lot more effective, right? I fear and I very much dislike, and I don't know if you've gathered this from this conversation, but operating off of hunches and vibes. And I think that there's a lot of technique that a lot of people don't use, right? Most people are just sort of creating based on feeling. And the thing that I fear, right, or that's the fear, my strategy for success there is drilling technique, getting this stuff into your bones, because I think that there's no other way to communicate with anybody else if you're working in some sort of collaborative, creative conversation. If we don't have a shared language for what it is that we're trying to do, then there's no way that we're going to get on the same page. And this is why I think a lot of bosses don't get content, because a lot of content creators don't get content the same way, right?
Yeah.
I think that content creators should not be passive consumers of media, right? Like I've got very strong opinions on that. You should be able to look at any piece of content and diagram it to the extent where
Ooh.
what's being used as a conflict, what's being used as the objective, like what the competing values are. You should be able to diagram all of this stuff, because if you can't, then you're going to have problems communicating your choices, right? Well,
Interesting.
because I
Yeah.
did customer research. Well, define customer research. What is it that you're trying to get out of the customer research? And what is it that you're trying to do? Like, and what will you do with it after?
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that's why a lot of bosses, like I did something called the State of Discontent report last year. And one of the things that a lot of people said was we don't do our customer research nearly enough. And there was a direct correlation between leadership buy-in and the amount of people doing customer research, right? Or the frequency of doing customer research. And what I have found just through private conversations, personal conversations, is that because that term can be so vague and fluffy, it's like, well, what do you do? Does that just mean effing around on, social media? What are you doing with the customer research and how are we going to incorporate it? Right.
We're back to
So for
your
me,
what's the ROI
right,
question from earlier.
right. Right. And for me, creating signature work from my perspective is, well, what are the Jungian archetypes that we're trying to get out of there? What are their core motivations? What are they motivated by? What are the channels that they're spending time on? Sure. But also, like, what is their cast, right? There's a functional cast that lives around this particular person. And how do they interact with the people in their lives? And what challenges do the people in their lives bring in? A lot
Yeah.
of content is one-to-one. It's you and me, right? It's you, me, and the reader, right? Or you,
Yeah.
me, and the listener, or you, me, and the viewer, or me and the viewer. I should not just say you and me. It's me and the viewer, right? Or listener or reader. But the
Yeah.
challenge with that is going back to the how to build a landing page example, right? If I say write a compelling headline and someone's like, well, I have 10 people who are trying to sign off on this thing, my headline's never going to get made, but I don't address that in the content, then I'm dismissed.
Yeah.
It's not relevant anymore. But if I can say, okay, well, from their perspective, their, their sales leader operates like the ruler who values, right? Then here's how that particular archetype can overcome challenges that other archetype might throw at them, right? And
So
can we
then
help them anticipate what those challenges are going to be?
in your writing, you would be thinking through like, okay, right now our January plan is this. We have this piece of content. These are the archetypes that are probably going to be reading it. How do we make sure we recognize the problems that each archetype will be facing and show them how to address it?
This is the one archetype who's going to be reading it. Again, getting back to that common spark,
Interesting.
right? Here's
How
the one archetype that's going to be reading it, and here are the people in their cast who are going to be posing challenges,
so
right?
if we were to say, let's take Shopify as an example, is it
hmm
true that only one archetype predominantly is going to be reading this content? Or is it more of a helpful fiction to pick one that you're focused on?
It's so one of the things that I'm working on right now. It's not fully developed. One of the concepts that I'm working on right now. Every TV show has something called a show Bible, right? And this is where it talks about the cast, it talks about the premise. It's like this thing is like this mixed with this, right? And you can look up show Bibles and see a whole bunch of different examples of what that looks like. When I look at the core archetype, our reader, right? Going back to what's that
Yeah.
common spark between the people who are there, right? And I'll see if I can address this properly. So we've got the core archetype of the people there. We've got the different ponds that we can fish in based on their titles, right? And where they work. Those are the common demographic things. Where do I distribute this thing to get people to there that speaks to that common core, right? Can I get the right people to the right places? I have all of this stuff mapped out in advance, right? My, VP of whatever, right, is going to spend time in these channels. I'm going to
Yeah.
promote this thing actively in those channels so I can make sure that there's a tight signal, right? That core archetype is going to be the same. And then the cast that comes in might be the same for that particular piece. And then the challenges, we can start to look at what those challenges are. But in the show Bible,
Yeah.
what I'm looking at is the cast, right? I've got the core archetype, right? The core reader.
Yeah.
Based on the customer conversations that we're having, I've got the functional cast that's around them. I'll bring up the slide. Hold on.
Oh, I
I
love
have
it.
this handy. And then what challenges based on the topic that we're talking about is that cast going to throw at them based on the topic, right? So
Yeah.
I'm giving
Oh, I
I'm
love
giving
this.
so much of this stuff away right now. Like,
People need to start paying for this podcast right now.
This is stuff we talk about in content theory and narrative design toolbox. So sign up for the wait list by clicking on the link in the featured section on my profile on LinkedIn. There we
Or
go.
if
You
you're
said
on
I could
YouTube,
promote.
it'll be somewhere below in the
Yeah,
speaker notes.
find it in the
Check it
show
out there.
notes. Yeah. So functional cast design. So what do I mean by that? I've said before, I'm a
Interesting.
fan of Robert McKee. Robert McKee is the author of Story, Dialogue, and Character. I highly recommend anybody who wants to see what my influences are on this, read Story at least. And one of the things that Robert McKee says about characterization and character, right? Characterization is about all of the observable qualities of a person. And this is what we would call demographics, right? Like, what do they wear? What's their age? What do they drive? Right? What's their sexuality? Like, how do they identify? What are all of the observable qualities of a person? We call that demographics. And then
Yeah.
character is what are the decisions that they make under pressure. And then the other part of character that I really like that he talks about is that different parts of a character are revealed by the cast that's around them, right? Have you watched Breaking Bad?
I've watched pieces of it, not the whole thing yet.
Okay, pieces of it. Okay, so I've watched Breaking Bad like 10 times and have diagrammed a lot of it. In Breaking Bad, right, you've got Walter White, who was a high school chemistry teacher, highly qualified, like overqualified, because he won a Nobel Prize. He was part of a Nobel Prize team, and he is diagnosed with cancer. He believes his super objective is to generate a ton of money for his family. So when he passes, inevitably, that he will have money left behind. So in the first season, at least, his super objective is generate a ton of money. His central conflict is his cancer, and he can die anytime, right? Well, we learn about Walter White through the interactions with his cast. So we learn that Walter White is kind of emasculated because of his relationship with his wife and his brother-in-law, right? We learn that he's kind of a pushover because he deals with one of his antagonists, with his boss, who is, he works a second job as a car wash, right? And he gets bullied around. But we also know, and from that Walter can be quite resourceful with his chemistry because of how he deals with drug dealers who might kill him, right? We also learn that he can both be caring and a bit of a jerk because of how he deals with his primary ally in Jesse, right? We also learn that Walt can be prideful and egotistical because he rejects the roles of his mentors. He rejects the offer that the particular mentor can have when his previous co-founders, right, offer him a job and they have the best medical insurance. But he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this on my own, man, even though he has a perfect out, right?
Yeah.
We also learn how resourceful he can be when he deals with his gatekeeper. He wants to eventually scale up the operation for them selling methamphetamines. That's the other thing. To deal with the super objective and to do all of that, Walt says, I'm a brilliant chemistry guy. I'm going to sell meth, right? When he wants to scale up the operation, there's a gatekeeper. His name is Tuco. How does he deal with Tuco to get him to take him seriously and move his operation to the next level? So the functional cast in Breaking Bad, or in any TV series, right, or movie, you've got your protagonist, you've got your ally, you've got your antagonist, right? And your ally is somebody who can help you move the story forward in a meaningful way. You've got your antagonist, who's not necessarily a bad guy. They just have a different philosophical viewpoint of the world. You've got your mentors, right, who are there to help guide you, but they don't have, they have a personal stake, but they don't have a plot stake. You've got your gatekeepers, you've got your sidekicks, who do help, but they don't have the ability to move the story forward the same way an ally would. And you've got your skeptics or tempters, which generally speaking are trying to either keep you in the status quo or give you an alternative path. You have these functional cast roles, and anybody who's watching the video right now, you can see one that I have for content marketers right on what this might look like. So we've got job titles, we've got their archetype, we've got their core belief, and we've got their impact on our protagonist and what that
This is
all
powerful.
looks like. Yeah.
This is really, really
So
powerful. I
this
highly
is,
recommend people check out the video because this does show really clearly how to think about this from a content perspective.
and if you're watching the video, you have to pause it to really absorb it and bring it all in. Get that retention time up. Why not? So yeah, this is all the stuff that I really try to teach and help people start thinking about, because this is how we start creating extra levels to the content that we're producing, right?
Yeah.
This is how we create signature work. This is how we get people wanting to click one more episode, right? Watching another video, listening to another podcast. And I really do feel like once these principles are adopted and they become, I really want to lead a new school of thought when it comes to how content marketing can operate, because I want
Yeah.
it to be worth people's time. I want it to be worth our creators' time, and I want it to be worth customers' time, because I'm tired of so much crappy marketing out there. Like,
Which is all the more important in this age of easily created, not very good content with AI.
yeah,
Putting
well,
intention
and
and thought is incredible.
you can see this. This is AI generated.
Yes.
You can
Yes.
tell
Which,
I've got ChatGPT on dark mode right now, right? Like, I had it help me with this based on the research that I've given it, because it knows everything. You just need to be
yeah.
able to know how to prompt it, and you can't prompt it if you don't know the principles on how this all works.
And I feel like that is the other really, really cool thing to realize, that there's so much garbage content with AI, but if you use AI well, it can be a huge ally. And absolutely, I think
Yeah.
we didn't have time to get into this in the interview, but you mentioned you have essentially 2 full-time robots working for you. There's so much that you can do with this stuff. It is very, very exciting. We could easily go another 2 hours, but we've come to the end of the time. In the meantime, where can people go to learn more about you, about your writing, your courses?
Yeah, most of the stuff, like, I'm redoing the whole website. Not right now, but will be soon. So the primary place I'm spending most of my time is on LinkedIn right now. So Tommy is my name, is my LinkedIn tag. And check out the show notes because it will be in there.
Yes. And you have, I believe, one course right now and another one coming soon.
They're both. So I've got the wait list for the narrative design toolbox coming up. That's still in development. And then content theory was a week-long program. I'm turning it into a 12-week program because there's a lot to unpack there. So both are kind of in development right now, but the narrative design toolbox is the one that's going to be launched sooner rather than later.
That is awesome. 1 to 12 weeks. That is an explosion of value right there. My goodness. Well, Tommy, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, man, for having me.